In this particular review video, we're going to be looking at how energy will transfer through an ecosystem. So in this image, I have a very simple food chain. If you notice, the food chain is starting with an energy source. The original energy source for almost all ecosystems on our Earth is going to be the sun. The sun will send its energy to Earth in the form of a wave. And that's when organisms known as producers or autotrophs will use that energy to make their own food. So, producers and autotrophs, most of the time, are using that energy in a process called photosynthesis. That's where they take in carbon dioxide and water, and they use that sunlight to change those two molecules into sugar or glucose and oxygen. They'll store a lot of that glucose in their cells, but they will use a lot of it as well. So the plant will use glucose and break it down through respiration for things like responding to a stimulus, growing, reproduction, its daily life functions. So, when an organism eats the plant, it's not going to be receiving all of the energy that that plant created through photosynthesis. It's only going to be receiving about 10% of the energy that it made because it's used most of it for life functions. The snail in this case is known as an herbivore because it only eats plants. Consumers that only eat plants are an herbivore. Now, if it is eating a plant, it is considered a primary consumer because it is one step away from the plant. It's the first consumer to actually consume the plant. Another organism may potentially then eat the snail. In this case, we have a bird. The bird is the predator of the snail. It is also considered an omnivore because birds, as we know, can eat things like seeds and grains that come directly from producers. So if an organism eats both plants and animals like this bird does, we consider it an omnivore. For this food chain, it's also considered a secondary consumer because it ate the organism that ate the plant. So it is two steps away from that producer or autotroph level. This bird can also be considered prey if an organism eats it, like in this case, the fox does. So the fox is going to eat that bird, so it is the predator. The fox typically only eats other consumers, so it is considered a carnivore. Organisms that only eat meat, that is the role that they are assigned, a carnivore. In this case, in this food chain, it's known as a tertiary consumer because when I count back, I see 1, 2, 3 steps away from that producer level, and it's receiving even less energy than the organisms before. Now, a fox can be considered sometimes a secondary consumer if it was going to eat the snail. But in this particular food chain, it's going to be listed as a tertiary consumer because it's 3 steps away from that producer. Now, if that fox were to have something occur to it, like old age, and it ends up dying, that fox's body is going to be broken down by things known as decomposers. Decomposers are things like bacteria and fungus in the environment, and their main role is to break down dead material and return all of those molecules to the environment so that way they can be reused and recycled. So all of the arrows are going from left to right, and that is because that is the direction that the energy is moving. So the arrows always indicate where is the energy moving to. So it started with the sun and it moved all the way through this ecosystem. Now, if we were to take a number of food chains and interconnect them or kind of make a web out of them, then this diagram is known as a food web. But once again, you can assign all of the energy roles to this food web that we just did with that single food chain. So if I were to look for the producers in this food web, I should say, the producers would be the wheat, the clover, and the dandelions, because those are what is taking the sun's energy and through photosynthesis, turning that energy into a usable form known as sugar or glucose. When I look at the arrows, any arrow that's coming off of the producers and going to an organism that is only eating the producers is known as a primary consumer or herbivore in this case. So the caterpillar, the grasshoppers, the mice, and the rabbits, all of these organisms right here are only eating plants, and that makes them a primary consumer. They're the consumer that is the first one to eat the plant. Then from there, we can have secondary consumers. We have our frog, our snake, our owls, or our hawks, because the frog eats the organism that eats the plant. So it is 2 steps away from that producer level. Or in this particular case, the hawk ate the mouse that ate the clover. So it's once again 2 steps away from that producer. But some of the organisms in this web you can actually find where they are 3 steps away from that producer. So if I were to look at a longer food chain, I could say the dandelion or the caterpillar ate the dandelion, the frog ate the caterpillar, the snake ate the frog, and the owl ate the snake. So that makes that owl also considered to be a tertiary consumer. So the owls, the hawks, and the snakes can all be in a food chain that puts them 3 steps away from that producer level. So we can take all of these energy roles and we can use these food chains to create what is known as an energy pyramid. So here you can see those producers, those that use the sun's energy to produce their own energy. You can see that they have written down here that it has 1,000 units of energy. These producers are going to give energy to the primary consumers. Notice that they're only going to get 100 units of energy. That is 10% of that producer's energy, because the producers used most of it for daily life functions. It also lost some of that energy as heat. From the primary consumers, you can see the secondary consumers. Once again, they only received about 10% of that original energy. And then you have the tertiary consumers up here that only got 1 unit of energy. So once again, that's 10% of the unit below it. So as you go higher in an energy pyramid, what you should see is that the energy starts really high with the producers and then begins to decrease all the way up to the top of that pyramid, which is why it has a pyramid shape. Also, we need to see that with an energy pyramid, it's not just showing us the amount of energy, but it's also showing you how many organisms within an environment you want in each of these categories. So your largest category you want in an environment are your producers, followed by primary consumers, followed by secondary consumers. And the smallest group you want is your tertiary consumers, because each of these levels receives energy from the level below it. So you want to make sure that the primary consumers have enough energy in order to obtain. So you want more producers than primary consumers. If you have more primary consumers, then somebody is going to end up competing with somebody else and somebody is going to lose, which means death will occur. So we want an environment to have the majority of its organisms to be producers all the way up. And the energy pyramid shows that as well. So if I look at this energy pyramid, you can see we have the producers, we have the primary consumers that are eating the producers, the secondary consumers that are eating the producers, or primary consumers that eat the producers, and then finally the tertiary consumers that ate the secondary consumers, that ate the primary consumers, that ate the producers. So what's missing in this particular energy pyramid that was in that initial food chain? The correct answer is decomposers. The decomposers would actually be found at all the levels of this energy pyramid, because it will break down any of those levels once they die and return those materials back to the environment. So this is kind of a review of all of the energy roles in an environment, how to read things like an energy pyramid, as well as how to read food webs and food chains. All of those would be potential things that I would ask questions about on your upcoming test. Good luck.